Now, the problem with Gary Lineker, like a lot of banks, is that he's too big to fail. This former footballing icon turned controversial broadcaster, whose latest entanglement with anti Semitic imagery has reignited calls for his dismissal from the BBC. What began as a well intentioned show of solidarity with Palestinians has descended into something that challenges his reputation, not just for Lineker himself, but for the public broadcaster that employs him. And Lineker, now 64, shared an Instagram story reposting a video from the Palestine lobby entitled Zionism Explained in 2 Minutes, which includes an image of a cartoon rat, an image with long-standing anti-Semitic connotations used extensively in Nazi propaganda. He deleted the post the following day, claiming ignorance of the symbolism, and his apology, issued through the PA news agency, insisted he would never knowingly share anything anti-Semitic and took full responsibility for this mistake. But for many, particularly Jewish staff at the BBC and figures in the campaign against anti-Semitism, the apology rings hollow. They argue Lineker has form, that this is part of a campaign of conflating legitimate criticism of Israeli policy with tropes historically used to incite racist hatred against Jews. And to be fair, Lineker is not alone in wishing to speak out against suffering in Gaza, and his support for humanitarian causes is well documented and positive. But how one expresses outrage matters, especially for someone of his profile. And the issue isn't not whether criticism of Israel is permissible, it absolutely is, but whether using historically loaded imagery undermines that criticism and inadvertently aligns one with hate groups. And this distinction isn't an issue of academic pedantry, it's a difference between advocacy and provocation, between calling for justice and perpetuating prejudice. As Hannah Arendt might have said, one must distinguish between solidarity and spectacle. The BBC, as Lineker's employer, is caught in a PR quagmire. The Director General, Tim Davie, speaking in Salford, emphasised that the BBC's reputation is held by everyone, and when someone makes a mistake, it costs us. Yet there has been no formal censure. Why? Because Lineker, despite his many lapses in judgment, remains their highest paid presenter and a figure of public affection. But affection cannot be a substitute for accountability. And let's remember, in 2023, Lineker compared government language on asylum seekers to that of Nazi Germany. That incident triggered a partial staff mutiny and forced the BBC to revise its impartiality guidelines. I think, incidentally, that the BBC was wrong in its approach then. I think it's wrong in its approach now. And that seems to be a contradiction. I'll try and explain it. But this latest error reopens the very wounds the BBC claimed to have sort of stitched up. At the heart of this saga is a much deeper cultural crisis, the peril of celebrity activism colliding with complex global politics. Lineker has become, in many ways, a caricature of the modern media figure, simultaneously self-righteous and uninformed, wielding a megaphone without a manual, and doing so in the name of a much bigger organisation, the BBC, because he has become the face of the BBC. And it's that issue which really needs to be addressed. The problem is not what Lineker shared, but that he did so with the unreflective certainty of someone used to praise, not to pushback. And it's a reminder that passion doesn't excuse carelessness, that influence without understanding can be dangerous, especially when millions are watching. And Gary Lineker is not above criticism. I don't think, in my view, my personal view is that he's not an anti-Semite. But he is rather plainly a man who has not understood the weight of his own words or the images that he distributes. In the pursuit of virtue, he has stumbled into vice. And the BBC must now decide, does it value principles or personalities more? And for the rest of us, this is a moment to reflect, not on cancelling people, but on demanding that public figures speak with care, with clarity, and above all, with genuine understanding. I think this is an opportunity for Gary Lineker and for the BBC to make a specific programme that analyses the issues and distinguishes between a criticism of Netanyahu, a criticism of the Israeli policies currently pursued, and a condemnation of the attacks on civilians in Gaza, and also a background of the history and the scope and the horror of anti-Semitism, as well as, I think, a background of the appalling terrorism that precipitated Netanyahu's knee-jerk response. I think to put all that together in one program would be an extremely positive move by the BBC, and it would start to redress these issues, because at the moment that issue that issue of proportional criticism and proportionality is not being dealt with by the BBC. Why? Because the BBC wants its own sensational headlines and wants to purr about verification. Verification isn't important. What's important is that we recognise that there is always bias. So we want to be biased in different directions, and we want to be able to offer the viewers the opportunity to make their own informed decision and to be better informed. It's not about taking information from here or taking information from there. It's about being informed and at the same time being entertained and feeling secure in that process. And I must admit, I feel increasingly insecure when I think of the BBC. I don't like its current arrogance, and I don't like the exploitation that it seems to be displaying of other journalists and of its own chosen promoters. The BBC is the national broadcaster, not the face of Gary Lineker, no matter how charming that face may be.